This is my second video on thesis statement generation. In the last video, I went over this model in quite a lot of detail. I'm not going to go over it in detail now, but very quickly. In order to generate your thesis, you have to ask three key questions. One is, what generally is the text about? And then you get your theme zone. So you read the text and it's about many things, and you want to focus on the theme zone of love. You're not finished there, however. Now you have to ask the question, what is the author trying to say about love, about that theme zone? And then you get a theme statement. The author seems to be, the poem is about love, and the author seems to be saying that love is blah, 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 blah. Now you go to the next step and you put the form together with the content and you ask, well, how does the author say that love is blah, 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 blah? And then you identify the literary devices, such as, the author says that love is blah, 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 and he uses metaphor and simile and alliteration to do that. Okay, so that's a nutshell look at form equals content for thesis generation. Let's go back and look at the model essays. We had 4 model essay introductions that we analyzed in a lot of detail in my first videos. So if you haven't watched those, go back and watch them, because I talk about the 4 elements that are required for your introduction paragraph. Now, however, I'm just going to focus on the thesis statement. The title of the first essay is 2 Poems, A View of Death. Now, you'll notice that right off the bat, the theme zone is indicated in the title. I can't say that that's 100% that's true all the time, but probably it's true for these ones. Guilt is the theme zone. What Macbeth is about a lot of things. What do they want to talk about? What do you, as an essay writer, want to say about Macbeth? Well, I want to focus on the guilt because I found that interesting. Metamorphosis is about several things, but obviously it's about the alienation. The theme zone is very often indicated in the title of your essay, and as you'll see, even up in here, even in that lead-in stuff, you have to indicate, because you're leading in your lead-in stuff, in your whole paragraph, it's an upside-down triangle. You're going from general to specific, and so you're leading the reader into the theme zone and then into a particular theme statement. So let's have a look at the theme statement here. The lyric poems Crossing the Bar by Alfred Lord Tennyson and Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson both portray death in an optimistic light. Well, that's kind of a theme statement. What generally are the poems about? Death. We got that twice up here. What are the poets trying to say about death? That we can also look at them in an optimistic light. Then it gets even more fine-tuned. Tennyson's poem is a lively metaphor of death as an adventure at sea, and Dickinson's contains a personified depiction of death as a graceful, dignified gentleman. So that's synopsis-y stuff. But that's the content. That's what we want to say about death. What's the theme zone? Death. What does the author want to say about death? That it can be portrayed in an optimistic light. Now, how do the poets say this? Both these portrayals of death are revealed through the poem's tone and imagery. So I got a 1,000-word essay where I'm going to walk through each of the poems, and I'm going to say, here's some tone, and here's some imagery, and here's how it applies to an optimistic view of death. Okay, let's look at the next one. So as we've seen, we already know what the theme zone is by reading the title. So your teacher knows that you're going to talk about guilt and Macbeth, obviously. In William Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Macbeth, the main character murders the good King Duncan. Lady Macbeth, his wife, is accessory to the murder. Husband and wife are clearly the ones to blame for the crime and deserve punishment. So there we go. There's another indication of the theme zone. But what about the manipulative witches? Are they therefore innocent? And what about Banquo, who suspected Macbeth's intentions? And what about Duncan himself, who was surely naive in trusting both Thanes of Cawdor? A close look at these 3 minor characters will reveal that they deserve at least some share in the blame for either causing or failing to prevent the murder. Okay, so let's reverse engineer this. The person who wrote this essay was thinking. They've studied Macbeth for 6 weeks, and now the teacher says, write an essay about anything you want. So they're obviously interested in the guilt. So they ask themselves that question. What is Macbeth about? Well, one thing it's about guilt. Then they ask the question, what is Shakespeare trying to say about guilt? And then they unpack that. And they come up with the fact that other characters share in the blame. It's not just Lady Macbeth and Macbeth that share the blame. It's an interesting approach because it's not an obvious approach. It defies the popular opinion, as we talked about in previous videos. Then they put that together. So they want to talk about the share of the blame. They want to talk about who's to blame. They want to say that lots of different people are to blame for this. Then they ask the third question, how does Shakespeare say this, that guilt is not just confined to the two main protagonists. They're going to explore form, and the form in this case is characterization. They're going to have 3 body paragraphs, probably one on each of these different characters, and they're going to analyze the characters. Now, if you remember characterization, that was one of the devices that your teacher taught you, and there's different ways that writers expose and reveal character, and so they're going to go. The essayist for this video is going to go into the details of that. All right, and the next one is on metamorphosis. This introduction introduces the theme zone in 3 places before we actually get to the thesis. It's in the title, of course, it's in the lead-in sentence, and all of this was all about the background information and defining terms of the word alienation. So all of this really is part of that theme zone. It's defining the theme zone. Alienation is this. Then it says it here. This is that grade 5-ish kind of statement. Watch this. It is not surprising then that one of the masterpieces of 20th century fiction, the novella Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, deals with the theme of alienation. You can say that. It's grade 5-ish because it's just indicating that, yeah, the theme of Harry Potter is racism or whatever. But watch what happens next. And then we get to the university level analysis of the theme zone in a clear, concise, sophisticated thesis statement. Through the symbolic transformation of the protagonist into an insect, the author suggests that modern alienation results in the dehumanization of the self. Reverse engineering the whole thing. What generally is the story about? Alienation. Simple. What is the author trying to say about alienation? Well, here it is right here. Modern alienation results in the dehumanization of the self. And how does the author say this? Through the transformation of the protagonist into an insect, which is the form of plot. So by looking at the plot, I'm going to reveal alienation as a dehumanizing mechanism. And the last one. So this introduction follows a slightly different pattern than the previous one. I've been teaching you that you should start with your theme zone, indicate your theme zone as right from the very beginning to get the reader ready. You don't have to do that. This one starts with priming the form. So they indicate the form that they're going to talk about before they get into the content, which is fine. And it's a good reminder that there is no one formula for writing essays. In fact, if you're writing in a formulaic way, you're probably starting to hate yourself, and you're not a very good writer. So you steal the phrases, you steal devices, you steal structures, but you have to rearrange them in your own head to make them worthwhile. Okay, let's have a quick read with this one. In fiction, readers can learn much about a protagonist by witnessing how they react to a crisis. In fact, writers often seem to present such crises specifically to test the nature and quality of the protagonist's character. This seems to be the case in the short stories Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway and One of These Days by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Each of the main protagonists in these stories is faced with a potentially life-changing decision, and despite their equally powerless status, Marquez's character demonstrates more independence and strength of character. Very, very interesting. This essayist, this student was put in a pretty tricky position. There's 2 short stories that on the surface have absolutely nothing in common. So what are they going to write about to synthesize the 2? They have to write a comparison contrast about them. And if things don't seem to have anything in common, then there's nothing to say. This question got them somewhere interesting. What generally are both of these stories about? Well, this story is about a dentist who's going to get shot by a thug in Colombia somewhere, in a small town in Colombia. And the other story is about a man and a woman having a marriage crisis or a relationship crisis. They don't seem to be about the same, well, they're not about the same thing at all. But what are they about? If you look carefully at this story, there's a power struggle going on between the man and the woman. So that's at the highest level, that's the theme zone. It's not a theme, it's a theme zone. Something about power and powerlessness. Well, what's going on here? Obviously, if you're going to get shot by a thug in a small town in Colombia, that's going to be about power and powerlessness. So that's the thing that unifies them. So do you see how useful it is to start with a theme zone? Start with it. You can't end there, but you start with it. Okay, so the theme zone is power and powerlessness. So what are the authors trying to say about that? Well, here it is here. The authors are trying to say that, yeah, we can find ourselves in bad situations where we have very little or no power, but we can choose to respond to those situations in a magnanimous way or in an ignominious way. And the conclusion for this essayist, this student, was that the Marquez character comes out looking better than the Hemingway character. They're both great stories, by the way, especially Hills Like White Elephants. Brilliant story. They add on the kind of obliquely. It's not. I mean, it's not intrusive all about the form here. It's not saying, well, I'm going to look at this particular metaphor only. No, it's kind of general. When you talk about plot and characterization, it's a bit general because everything is about plot and characterization. So how do the authors reveal this interesting power struggle? They do it through plot and characterization. Here's the plot. There's a crisis. And here are the characters responding to that crisis. Well, there's characterization and plot. Okay, so those are the 4 models. Read them again, get a sense of the rhythm, practice this technique, and I think you will find it immediately useful. And that's the end of the lesson 3 on thesis statement. Go back and watch these if you haven't. That'll help you make a lot more sense of what we talked about today. And join me for my next video when I talk about theme.